Hi there, this is Karen Kuniyuki with the Emmanuel School of Fine Arts, here with an art lesson about painting bluebonnets in watercolor. Bluebonnets are a classic spring Texas flower. You're going to need some watercolor paints, brushes, watercolor paper, and if you'd like to, you can tape out your surface to hold the paper down or to create a nice clean edge. To start, I'm going to lay down a background. I'm using a wet-on-wet technique where I paint the paper with water first and then add different pigments of color. I also have a little scrap piece of paper to test colors on to see if it's the color I want before I put it on my composition. Next, I'm going to use another scrap piece of paper to practice creating bluebonnet flower shapes with my fingertip. I'm wearing a glove so it doesn't stain my finger. You can wear a glove or you can go without. Bluebonnets are a collection of little blue petals, and then they have a long stem. They can grow over a foot tall, but in our picture, we're just going to create 6 to 8 inch tall bluebonnets. You can use a variation of color from dark blue on up to purple, pink. Once you've practiced on a small piece of paper, you can go back to your original background and start adding bluebonnets into your picture. The areas of blue that I've painted in my picture help to show bluebonnets in a distance. As things get further away in my picture, they become blurry. And as the bluebonnets are closer to me, they become brighter, crisper, clearer to see, and closer to the bottom of the page. It's important to remember that flowers in nature don't all grow perfectly, which is why I'm going to put more than one bluebonnet in my picture. And in some places, I might just add a little hint of color. That might be where the plant is just starting to grow, or maybe it's been trampled by an animal passing through the meadow. Using your finger to stir up your watercolor palette will create a really rich, bright color. If you want this watered down, just add water. The more water you add, the lighter the value of the color. You'll see I keep going back and adding layer upon layer of color. The more layers of color you add to your picture, the more realistic your image is going to look. In some areas, I'm blending and smudging with my fingers. When I finish creating the bluebonnet, I'm going to let this dry before I come back to add the stems and the grasses in the next video clip. After your picture has dried, you also have another opportunity to come back in with brushwork and create more layers of color in that grassy meadow area. I also decided I wanted to create a little bit of a blue sky. I have a lot of yellow in my picture representing sunshine. I wanted my meadow to look like it was basking in morning light. Again, after you add layers of color, allow your picture to dry, or you can also use a hairdryer to speed along the process. Now I'm getting ready to paint the stems and leaves and grasses in my picture. I'm using a thin brush, and I've mixed up a couple of different colors of green. And I paint each stem going out towards the little blossom clusters. And after I do this in one color and let it dry, I come back with a darker color and go over some of the same lines to give it a little bit of a shadow. Bluebonnets have clusters of green leaves at their base, and they also grow very close together along highways and in meadows. It is very common in Texas to see families pulled off along the side of the highway, taking family pictures in the bluebonnets, or having kids and babies sit in the bluebonnets for their annual spring picture. It's a tradition in Texas, a wonderful one. But I will say, you have to be careful if you do this, because bluebonnets are a favorite place for rattlesnakes and fire ants to live. So you have to be really careful about where you step and where you go traipsing around in a meadow to take pictures. The more time you take to go back into your picture, adding grasses of different shades, use a variety of greens, not just one color green, add a little bit of brown to it, add a little bit of yellow to it, make your grasses vary in height and in thickness. I wanted my grasses to have a blurry effect. I didn't want it to look too realistic. I'm not trying to create a photograph. So I went back over some of my grasses with some water. And then you can see I'm using a hairdryer to speed up the process of drying. If you have a lot of water on your picture when you use a hairdryer, you have to be careful that the hairdryer doesn't push your watercolor paint in a direction you don't want it to go, which is why I'm using the diffuser on the end of my hairdryer. My hairdryer is very strong and it blows the air in a very concentrated direction, so I put the diffuser on to kind of make the air softer on the paper. It's less likely to move my paint around in a direction that I didn't intend for it to go. I'm putting a little bit of white acrylic paint on my plastic palette. The white acrylic paint, together with the blue watercolor that was already on my brush, is helping me make a nice cloudy light blue. I'm adding that to just some of the petals to give the petals variety. I encourage you to go outside and see if you can find a flower and study how the light hits the flower and creates shadows and highlights. How many different shades and tones you would actually have to create to make that flower look realistic. After my picture is completely painted, I remove the painter's tape, creating a nice clean edge around my whole painting. If you're using masking tape for this, press it against your clothing first before putting it on the paper. You're less likely to tear the paper. And there we are, a bluebonnet painting. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. We're making these art lessons to help everybody who's trying to educate at home during this pandemic. We appreciate you sharing our site. Have a great day. Bye.